So I suppose that we can get started. So Scott, do you want to take it away with an introduction?
Yes, I would. Well, welcome very much. This is Buddy Levy. He's the author of about 8 books or so, I think, and the big three on the Arctic, the third of which we'll be talking about today, which is called Realm of Ice and Sky. And Buddy, you're a native in Washington State, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, nearby. I live in Idaho, which is right on the border of
Okay.
Eastern Washington.
And you're a professor at which college?
Washington State University.
That's right,
38 years. Yeah.
WSU. And well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but do you want to tell us a little bit about what it is that you teach?
Oh, sure. I've taught everything from American Lit, Survey, British Lit, Native American literature, and creative writing, of course. And so the last number of years, and screenwriting, as it turns out. So I'm all over the map, and I've had a really fun run. Mostly it's been great because I've had a relatively non-traditional academic career in that I have written about all these different subjects, and including early on, I did some journalism and covered adventure sports around the world, and so my chairs, of whom I've outlived something like 9, have been pretty flexible as far as letting me take time off to go on these wild adventures and research excursions, some of which I'm going to talk about a little bit today. So yeah, it's been a fun run, kind of winding down. I'm hoping to finish up in a few years.
Okay. Well, thank
Well,
you.
we're so excited to have you, buddy, and so excited to hear about your book for many of us who've read it and some who haven't gotten to it but are super excited to. So why don't you take it away with your presentation?
Okay, well, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank Scott and Sara for inviting me, and of course Allegra for agreeing to moderate. I had the great pleasure of meeting Allegra in Athy, Ireland, at the Shackleton conference, where I was talking about my book Empire of Ice and Stone, because it had a couple of Shackleton team members, and it was just a remarkable experience. And I was mostly impressed by Allegra and her cadre of young polar enthusiasts. So she's really doing a great job of getting new young blood into the fray, and it's been I'm just really impressed, and also loved your amazing article that you wrote recently. And she's
Thank
working
you
on a
so
book, so
much. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, that's about it. I wanted to say that I want to talk a little bit about how I ended up getting here, meaning in a way to Arctic studies and Arctic exploration. I guess part of it has to do a bit with my father, who, as it turned out, he was a Nordic ski. He was an amazing. Grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, and went to college in Colorado, and then he saw his first snow at the age of 18. And not very long after that, he ended up becoming a Nordic skier. And his coach at Western State College at the time, but that's what it was called, was a Swede who ended up coaching. My father competed in the 1956 Winter Olympics in Cortina, Italy. And when he finished the Olympics, he traveled in Scandinavia for 3 months, and during that time, he really became enthralled and fixated with the toughness of the Scandinavians. And he told me all these stories, and so that partly drove my interest. But it was very slow. It was a slow burn. It took me a long time to get back around to the Arctic. And then I wanted to say that my son spent a few years in the Peace Corps in the High Atlas Mountains of Morocco, and he latched onto this Hamazit Berber language term called Amudo, which means the journey. And we've been talking a lot about life and journeys, and it got me thinking about how important Amudo, the journey, is to my writing. And in writing these narrative histories that I do, the journey of going to the places I write about is invariably the most enjoyable part of the process. Not the 1 year slog of writing the book, but the research part. And I like to physically go where I'm writing about. So I wanted to give a bit of a roundup of some of the places that I've been in preparation for writing these books, including the recent trip to Svalbard, which is the primary setting for Realm of Ice and Sky. So for my book Conquistador, which I wrote in 2008, I followed the route of Hernan Cortez and his army of bloodthirsty and gold-crazed killers from where they landed their ships and unloaded weapons and horses at Veracruz, Mexico in 1519, up through the lowland jungles and over the mountains, flanked by these immense volcanoes looming over 17,000 feet high, and then down into the Valley of Mexico, where at the time the spectacular Tenochtitlan gleamed. And for my book River of Darkness, I traced the 1541 to 1542 route of Francisco Orellana from Quito, Ecuador, over the Andes and down into the Amazon basin, where I traveled hundreds of miles in dugout canoes from Coca, Ecuador, to Peru along the mighty Amazon River, sleeping in hammocks strung from these giant ceiba trees in these flooded forests or varzea. And this is me, gringo, research, taking up 2 chairs, unfortunately, reading initial accounts of the trip down the Amazon by Orellana. And I make these journeys for a number of reasons. I mean, one, I love to travel to far-flung places for adventure and new experiences. And I firmly believe that being physically in the locales where I'm writing about benefits my books immensely, providing the reader with a visceral, firsthand, ground-level view that, if I do my job and write well, provides a real sense of what it might have been like for the explorers I'm writing about. And while traveling in these routes and environs, I carry with me and read the firsthand accounts, diaries, logbooks, original published journals of the explorers and participants to help transport me back in time. I just wanted to share an excerpt from the first page of River of Darkness to give you an idea. Conquistador Francisco Orellana stood on the sodden riverbank and regarded the ceaseless roil of the river, uncertain where the dark waters were heading. In the dying light, the water appeared black as it slithered downstream, moving like the skin of some gargantuan dark snake disappearing into an endless jungle. His men lay moaning beneath makeshift shelters of palm fronds, their sickly skin white, riddled with bites and stings from mosquitoes, army ants, wasps, and vampire bats. Behind them, from the impenetrable lowland rainforest, sounded the ominous lion-like roars of red howler monkeys and the piercing calls of macaws. And then this is me on the Grand Canyon with this remarkable human named Erik Weihenmayer, who was the first blind person to summit Mount Everest, to kayak solo through the Grand Canyon. He's just, and I ended up writing a book called No Barriers with him. But before that happened, I had followed him to this multi-day, multi-discipline adventure race in southeastern Greenland. And it was while I was there, and I was embedded with his team, and it was while I was there in this town here called Tasiilaq that I ended up meeting this person who changed the course of my research in my area, and her name is Ingrid Asta, and Ingrid is remarkable. She had she was on the team of all Inuit. She was Norwegian, but the other 3 women were Inuit athletes, and she. This is her climbing this really, really high mountain called Polemsfeld, and I ended up. I was right near her and with Erik and his team, and climbed the mountain too. But Ingrid ended up giving me a book that many of you have probably have read called Fridtjof Nansen's First Crossing of Greenland. And I was so inspired that I started digging into Arctic exploration and literature, and that kind of propelled me on that path. But it was actually 20 years later that I would meet up with Ingrid in Svalbard to do my research. And this is the mountain. They had to kayak across the fjord there and then trek up and summit that mountain, which was a pretty significant effort, actually. And I ended up, like I said, being embedded with Erik's team and summiting myself, and it was really hard. But mostly, I guess, when I saw Greenland for the first time, I was transfixed by icebergs. And I just love the formations of them. And seeing them up close like this, I was in a boat not far away with a cameraman named Tony DeZina, who shot that picture. And it informed my writing, including the following excerpt from my first Arctic book, which is Labyrinth of Ice. And this is from the point of view of Adolphus Greely. Some of the bergs resembled immense white-blue anvils. Others conjured the arched and plated backs of stegosaurs, and some looked like the wind-scoured sandstone towers he'd seen in the American Southwest. Most of the icebergs he could not describe or compare to anything he had witnessed before in nature. So I just tried to do icebergs justice. And so fast forward 20 years later, and this is me. I ended up meeting with Ingrid, and it was kind of amazing because she grew up in Norway, is a really accomplished adventurer. She once skied the entire distance from the top of Norway to the bottom, camping the entire time. But she had never been to Svalbard. So when I told her I was going to go do research there for Realm of Ice and Sky, she said, can I join you for the first week or so? And we can do some excursions. And the book Realm of Ice and Sky, I should mention, is not a single voyage or a history of a single voyage, but rather is a history of a single type of voyage, airborne in experimental lighter than air flying machines called airships or dirigibles. And during my first week there, I spent with Ingrid, we trekked many miles, traversed valley glaciers, scrabbled through rubbly moraine debris, and forded spring runoff streams, summiting peaks, and also we sea kayaked. You all, if you have the book and you all know the region, but that gives you just some perspective on where Svalbard is in relation to the North Pole. And there's another colorful one of Spitsbergen itself, and the central areas of note are Ny-Ålesund, and of course Danes Island, where Walter Wellman made his attempts. So Realm of Ice and Sky chronicles three men, and in those days, of course, they were all men, who attempted to fly airships to the North Pole. It's a three-part book with Wellman making his attempts in the early 1900s, then Roald Amundsen, the goat, and Umberto Nobile in 1925 to 28, and finally, culminating in Nobile's misadventures and history's greatest Arctic rescue. Of course, that's partially marketing. I know it could be argued whether or not that's history's greatest Arctic rescue, but I and the marketing department at St. Martin's are rolling with it. So the setting for much of the book is Svalbard, as you know, and it's just a wild and mystifying place. Here's where Ingrid and I stayed for the first week. There's the Longyearbyen airport, and my tent is the third one from the left. I found it rather ironic that I was in a Scott tent because, of course, he pioneered the design of that tent, and it was in this very style of tent that he perished on his return from the South Pole. A side note, some of you may know this, but in 2020, tragically, a Dutch man was pulled from his tent and mauled to death by a polar bear in this very spot. And the deeper irony was that he had come to put up that electric fence that you see going around the perimeter. and the fencing and everything was all laid out by the camping lodge house. But before he got to it, it was really windy, and even though there were some dogs around, the wind was blowing in a direction that he got no warning, and so that happened. And I have to say that, so I flew into the airport and walked a couple of 100 yards with my backpack and stuff. And the first few nights were, well, here's a diary excerpt. My first few nights were fitful, owing to the midnight sun, the cackling of nesting barnacle geese, the piercing cries of Arctic terns, and my near constant fear of polar bears. The electric fence encircling the campground, installed after the horrific 2020 incident, offered little solace. Every huff of wind ruffling the tent flap I feared was a hungry polar bear nosing or pawing its way in. I shivered in my tent at 28 degrees, unarmed, naked and afraid, humbled and unsettled at being at least number 2 in the food chain. So, of course, any of you who've been to Svalbard know that the perimeter of the town has this signage to watch out for polar bears. And, if you're traveling with guides for most excursions, they have rifles and flare guns. But I didn't want to go through the licensing to be carrying a weapon around. So whenever you get to those signs, there's just this odd feeling of, like, how much farther past this sign should I really go? And of course, they have a really great warning system with apps, and everyone, when a polar bear is spotted, people are notified. I should add that I forgot to mention that the 2020 incident happened when during COVID, when there was no one manning the towers at the airport, and they believed that the polar bear just walked right across the tarmac and straight down into the campground there. Anyway, we did see polar bears. It was really amazing. I happened to be, thankfully, in a boat and not on shore. And I was also going to add that I did at Long Urban Camping, I did the obligatory naked polar plunge right in front of the campground, but I decided to spare you that slide. And a couple of weeks after I got home, the camp host sent me a picture of a polar bear in the exact spot where I had jumped into the water. So I was glad to have been already home. These photos were taken by this local man named John Borga Carlson, and he shoots some amazing wildlife photography. And I was standing right next to him in this ship. And for those of you who have been to Svalbard, these bears were over by the bizarre town of Puranen, which is the Russian town there. And then, of course, they are extremely beautiful, but you don't really want that guy pouncing on you. And I suppose I had heightened, all 3 Arctic books that I've written have polar bears in them, and the encounters are really, they're close and they're frightening, and so you're on heightened alert. You're always thinking about them. So here I am sea kayaking with Ingrid to get some sense of what the explorers encountered. I wanted to hear the calving Svea Glacier crumbling into the water, and here's a description inspired by this paddling journey. Massive slabs of glacial ice cleaved off the shore and crashed into the sea, spewing freezing brine water over the gunnels. There are a number of scenes in Realm of Ice and Sky, as you know, or will know when you read it, of airships crash landing in the mountains. So I really wanted to be in these very mountains. This is a Danish man named Thomas atop this thing called Trollsteinen. It's a really, really an amazing hike. We did 2 summits, and you can see that the valley heads down. Longyearbyen, the town, is at the fjord there at the bottom, and I had the good fortune to be ensconced at the Spitsbergen Artists Center for 10 days, where I would go off and do my physical research and then come home to this really nice artist center and sort of write up my notes about what I had seen and read. So in many ways, the highlight of the trip was Ny-Ålesund. I guess that was pronounced Ny-Ålesund. It was there in this remote outpost that is now part International Polar Research Center and part historical museum that I got closest to the intrepid aeronaut who populate my book, Realm of Ice and Sky. Much of the town, which was then called Kings Bay, still stands as it did when Amundsen and Umberto Nobile and American Lincoln Ellsworth, who helped finance the expedition, were here in 1926, bent on making history. Today, it remains the northernmost permanently inhabited town, I'll put in quotes, in the world, and has a fascinating history dating back 400 years, mostly used in whaling and then later the coal mining industries. And this is the Amundsen Villa, this little beautiful tidy red house with white trim and black roof, and it remains really well preserved. It's where he stayed in 1925 when he did his airplane adventure, and 1926. And in the 30s, it was used as a hotel and later a bar called the North Pole Bar, which I really wish I could have been to. So I'll get back to Ny-Ålesund, but first we have to talk a little bit about Walter Wellman, who is the least known of the explorers in Realm of Ice and Sky. So before Amundsen would make his airplane and then airship journeys from Ny-Ålesund, American Walter Wellman was trying by airship from Danes Island, 50 miles north. Wellman was a conundrum. I mean, he was nearly 50 years old when he first attempted airship flights to the North Pole, though he'd made a number of previous traditional dog sled expeditions. And by this time, he was a noted, very famous journalist who hobnobbed with the likes of Theodore Roosevelt, J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, and other captains of industry who were also backers of his expeditions. He was fascinated by science and a pioneer in using the latest technology for Arctic exploration. Of course, as you see in the book, not all of it always worked, but I really admired him for giving it a try. On one of his first dog sled journeys in Franz Josef Land, he'd broken his leg after falling into a crevasse and suffered frostbite and nearly had to have his leg amputated. He subsequently walked with a limp and a cane for the rest of his life. But he'd been watching and writing about balloon races in France, and after returning home from this near-death experience, he had this epiphany, and he wrote, "Recently, it seems the time had come to adopt new methods to make an effort to substitute modern science with brute force, the motor-driven balloon or airship for the muscles of men and beasts stumbling along in their heroic struggle to accomplish the almost impossible." And this is him in the gondola of the airship America at Danes Island. At the time, many of you know, around 1905 through 1909, this is the period of Wellman's airship attempts to the North Pole. The airship was in its fledgling stages. And for context, in 1903, the Wright brothers were testing the Wright Flyer at Kitty Hawk, making a distance of just 200 feet. And by contrast, in France, just a few months before, the Buddy brothers had flown their airship a distance of 38 miles. It was an open question whether the heavier-than-air airplane or the lighter-than-air dirigible would gain the supremacy of the skies. And I really like that historical element of it, because in many ways, it was a race to see which technology was going to rule the skies. And Wellman, of course, was betting his reputation, all of his money, and in fact, his life on the airship. So for his attempts, he had the airship America built in France and then dismantled and sent by ship to Danes Island. And there's some of the specs of the airship. And some of you may know the story of Solomon Andre, who in 1898, I think 1898, had attempted to fly from here, in an unmotorized balloon. And so this really was very, very early airship design. And here's a excerpt from the prologue that I kind of like. When it involves the Airship America first leaving the hangar here. The dim light of early morning revealed an enormous oblong form rising from the bay like an ominous gray cloud. But it was nothing that came from land or sea. It was a man-made thing, a giant gas-filled balloon emerging from a massive wooden hangar, guided out by dozens of men clinging to taut drag lines and cables. It was the Airship America, a spherical 180-foot long, 50-foot wide dirigible inflated with 274,000 cubic feet of highly flammable hydrogen, powered by a single sputtering 750-pound, 75-horsepower gasoline engine. In its gondola rode three men, the visionary expedition leader Walter Wellman, engineer Melvin Banneman, and navigator Felix Riesenberg. They were all attempting something perilous and untried in history, to fly a motorized airship to the North Pole and to somehow, with luck, return alive. And this is Camp Wellman, which a journalist visiting there described as Wellman's scientific village in the Arctic. And here, he built a base camp house that is in the foreground, machine shop, a hydrogen manufacturing plant, and a giant airship hangar. His ambitious plans, and of course some of them at the time called them foolhardy and even suicidal, they drew international interest. And you can see that boats, ships of tourists and actually dignitaries would come to see what was going on there. Here on Danes Island, he also built, which I found fascinating, the first wireless radio station in the Arctic, and sent the first wireless message ever dispatched from there to President Theodore Roosevelt. And this is the hangar under construction, which, these were all very elaborate engineering endeavors. This is a shot of the crew of the America, and only that Major Hersey didn't fly because of illness, or perhaps he thought better of it. So, I have another quick excerpt. With his three-man crew, Wellman made a number of flights from Danes Island, and I like this excerpt where they're leaving. Head her north, full speed, Wellman barked to Riesenberg behind the wheel, and America churned through rising mist and fog, heading due north toward the mountains and polar ice pack beyond. Snow began to fall, the large flakes collecting on the rubberized cotton silk envelope. From the control car, Wellman looked down from their great height and watched the sea fade away below them until they were encased in a ghostly expanse of whiteness, disappearing into a frozen realm of ice and sky. And of course, that's where I stole my title from myself. I love when that happens, actually. Here's I call him the GOAT. I'm willing to argue about whether that's the case. But in 1909, after both Frederick Cook and Robert Peary had claimed to reach the North Pole, Wellman believed that the prize had not been taken. And I think some history will bear out that was true. And the controversy is also a part of the book. So Amundsen set his sights on being the first to fly an airship across the Atlantic from the east coast of the US to Europe. Wellman. Wellman decided to be the first to fly across the Atlantic. And Wellman's pioneering efforts were significant enough that in 1926, Amundsen, the Norwegian who had gained fame by being first through the Northwest Passage, first to the South Pole, decided to try flying an airship there himself. So with the backing of this American Lincoln Ellsworth, they purchased this airship from Benito Mussolini's fascist government. And it had been designed by Umberto Nobile. With Amundsen as the expedition leader and Nobile as the pilot, they would try to fly not only to the North Pole, but across the entire Arctic Ocean from Ny-Ålesund to Alaska. And it was still terra incognita up there, not completely known whether it was all sea ice or whether a landmass, another continent, might be discovered. At least that was the thinking. There's the dapper Nobile in his fancy military dress and plans. And, you know, in the decade and a half since Wellman's attempts, airship design had evolved considerably. Some were now over 600 feet long and had proven flights across the Atlantic. The first to do so was, I believe, the British R-34 in 1919. And it kind of bore out that Wellman's theories had been right, but he was just a little too early to the game. These were being developed in Germany, France, and Italy, and some in the US, and tested during World War I. And they were, of course, spectacular flying machines. I love this shot of the dapper Lincoln Ellsworth, where I found him to be, I think he deserved a book of his own, a biography. He's really, really inspiring. So he accompanied Amundsen on an airplane attempt to the North Pole in 1925, and that's one of my favorite chapters of the book. Really close calls, of course. And here's the Norge near the mooring mast. I told you we'd get back here eventually, where I stood during my research visit. And this is on May 11th in 1926. And this was a 350-foot long powered airship powered by three 250 horsepower motors. The top speed was around 50 miles per hour, faster with the tailwind and slower with a headwind, of course. And mechanics rode inside the engine cars, or gondolas, which you can see on the side. And then the control car was up front. And here's an image I love of the spectacular Norge heading into a storm. Of course, there would be plenty of these in their flights, and lots of drama accompanying these flights. But since some of you haven't read the book, I'll leave you to contemplate and read about those amudos, those journeys, since I think reading about courageous, if hubris-filled journeys is its own kind of journey. And we'll just conclude with an excerpt from the prologue. In the span of 3 decades, 3 men would try to fill in the blank spot on the map at the top of the world. And they would do so not by the traditional, long-tried and always failed dog sled method, but by airship. Realm of Ice and Sky is a serial history of the airship explorations to reach the summit of the Earth. The aerial explorers would innovate and experiment and risk their own lives and the lives of their crews in a dangerous, deadly quest to be the first to fly to the North Pole. There would be joy and sorrow, tragedy and suffering. There would be disaster. There would be triumph. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm happy to field any questions you might have that I can possibly answer.
Thank you so much, Buddy. That was excellent. Well, we've got a few questions that have been put through in the forum earlier today. So why don't I just start off with, this is a great question from Emma. Have you seen the Titina movie, the animated movie about Nobile and
little dog?
Amundsen? Yeah, and the dog. Yeah.
You mean Emma, whom I met in Athy?
Yeah, I think so.
Hi, Emma.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but I should. It sounds great.
It's a really fun movie. Definitely recommend it. Okay, here's a question.
And also, I just wanted to say that it was, he got Nobile got a lot of grief about Titina because, she was always with him on these flights, and sometimes there was criticism about would having this little yappy terrier be distracting to the crew and everything, but she was and she figures in a couple of kind of hair-raising episodes once the Italia has its debacle on the ice north of Spitsbergen. Titina has a little encounter with the polar bear. It's pretty intense. Oh, by the way, where can I find that animated film?
I don't know. Does somebody know? It might be on streaming. Maybe you're able to rent it.
Emma
Someone might
will
have
Emma
it.
will tell me later.
I'm sure. Okay, this is a question from our friend Phil. What was the most fun and or memorable experience you had while working on Realm of Ice and Sky? You know, research related or not. Obviously, you just told us so many amazing stories from your adventures overall, but while working on this book,
Yeah,
did you have any specific
yeah.
interesting?
I mean, I suppose like so to get to the day I chose to go to New it was incredibly rough, and I only had a few more days there, and
Mhm.
so I had to kind of go when I had booked this boat, and it took hours and hours, and we took a severe beating getting there in the boat. It calmed down. It calmed down later, but I mean, just walking around the place and standing at the mooring mast and being and sort of casting myself back in time, because it remains very much like it's like a living museum, and it's also a significant
Mhm.
international research station. I
Mhm.
think the power of that place, and imagining them, getting into this airship and just heading north, um, not knowing exactly what was going to happen, um, was really a powerful experience for me. And the whole trip, also camping, gave me a sense of what it was like on the ground for these folks when things didn't always go well and they were stranded. And so that I guess the whole experience of Svalbard and there's some tremendous museums there. I did a talk at the Svalbard Museum, and then there's a North Pole Museum too in town. And so the place is just magical, really.
Yeah. Oh man, I would love to go. Um, So we've got a couple questions here about your research process and especially how you go about finding and using primary sources. So we have a lot of Carluck fans here, a lot of Greeley fans. So if you want to talk about this book or any of your past polar books, how you go about finding those sources and picking which parts of those sources to quote or to paraphrase in the book and anything about that.
Right. That's such a great question. And it's probably um, I'd say it's the most difficult part of the process. Remarkably, with these Arctic explorations, I've been in, I've just been blown away by the thought, even going back to Labyrinth of Ice or Empire of Ice and Stone, where they are spending months on the ice and have to
Mhm.
travel by dog sled and build igloos to sleep in, and then have the time and wherewithal and the energy to know that this uh, expedition is being, that it needs to be recorded for history, for posterity, and then often for scientific purposes. And so the idea that these guys, are sitting there with seal or whale blubber lamplight in an igloo, scribbling in their diaries and journals. And I have to say, I've broken down in tears a couple of times, particularly in Empire of Ice and Stone, when um, this one member literally, you see his last
Which
diary
member?
entry.
We know their names. You have to say
Bjarne
who.
Ymamen,
Oh,
Bjarne
thank you.
Ymamen, he essentially perishes during like the last line that he's writing, and you're like, and he wants to get home to his fiance, and oh my
Hmm.
God. But so the beauty of it is that, I mean, digitization has helped dramatically. So one of the first things I do, obviously, is I get all of the books that are written by the surviving members, if they wrote books. And then
Hmm.
I go to the National Archives of each country where these people are from, and I try to ingratiate myself with librarians they run the world, and they run the world of this kind of archival history at any rate, and they know where to find things. And so I explain what I'm trying to do, and then often they'll send me, and I have to buy a lot of this stuff, and that's okay. It's worth it. And then because I still have right behind me in these files, I have like William McKinley's entire diaries and journals, and it's in his penmanship, and And so sometimes you're trying to decipher what they wrote because it's scrawlish and scribbly given the conditions. And so the other question, of course, is once you have it all, and I mean, I always tell fiction writers that I feel like I have this really great advantage in certain respects because I know how the story ends, you know. But picking like they say a lot in these journals and diaries and logbooks, and it's kind of a puzzle piece, or it's kind of putting together a puzzle of what are the salient quotes, when to use them, how they fit while you're also trying to write a dramatic page turner that is true to the historical record. So, that's this is obviously what I write is considered popular history or narrative history, but I still am very much married to and devoted to the idea of not having all of the Arctic scholars come after me and say, "Oh, you made this up," or "That didn't happen." And of course, I'm going to make mistakes, but I really try. I was reading a review just the other day in preparation for this talk, and someone said, "Well, he makes up dialogue," and I said, I didn't respond to him, but I actually don't make up dialogue. I use the dialogue from, what they said in their journals, and I embed it in there. Now, there may be a little bit of suspension of disbelief or something, but sometimes it's not exactly where they said it. And the other thing that these would have been benefited from, especially on something like Labyrinth of Ice, where it was purely, not purely, but primarily a scientific journey. And so they took hundreds and hundreds of records every day of meteorology, ice depth, ice movement, what was the temperature, and it really allows you to have the reader feel like they're there and it's 56 degrees below zero on a particular date with a wind chill of whatever. And so that's been incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
Long answer.
Yeah. No. That's the exact kind of detail that this Polar Book Club is totally here for. I've got a question about this one is from Curious Walrus, who wants to know, how do you go about choosing a topic for a book? Does the topic choose you? I know that when we met to tech check, you're talking about, where you want to go with your next book projects. And, you've done a bunch of these Arctic books. You've also written about a lot of other really interesting historical topics. So yeah, how do you sort of prioritize what you want to write about next?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I've had the good fortune and luck to have written a book every 2 or 3 years since 2005. And it's, I'm kind of a chameleon. My first book, New York book, my first book was actually a natural history of a very little known avian game bird species called the chucker partridge. And when I told my friend Erik Weihenmayer, the adventurer, about that, because we were talking about me writing a book for him, I told him about that book, and he said, "What was that, a bestseller?" It's like 3 people have ever heard of the chucker partridge, So no, it was not. But some of them I stumbled onto. Crockett, I wrote a book about the frontiersman David Crockett, and then my agent at the time, when I finished that book, he actually sent me this article about the Andalusian horse that he'd seen in the New York Times. So I wrote this really great proposal about the history of the Spanish horse, the Spanish horse throughout historical events. And it was a great proposal, and it absolutely failed in the marketplace and didn't sell. And so I was like licking my wounds because I spent months writing this thing. And when I finally had I had recovered enough to call my agent, Scott Waxman, and said, "Hey man, I'm over it, but I need to figure out what to do." And he said, "Well, while you were writing that book," because it had like 16 different chapters about different elements of the Spanish horse. And he said, "While you were writing that proposal, what was the most interesting chapter to you?" And I said, "Oh my God, hands down, Cortez bringing the Spanish horse and reintroducing it back to Mesoamerica, and then the fateful meeting between Cortez and Montezuma. And he's like, "Well, write that then." and so I started going back, and it was kind of challenging too, of course, because this was not untrammeled territory. Many great writers had embarked on the conquest of Mexico. And I remember telling this really dear friend of mine, who's one of America's finest poets, I said, so many people have written about this. I'm really nervous. And the same thing for Crockett. And he said, well, you just have to write it better than they did. And I'm like, well, thanks, Bob. Okay. But so that one was by accident. And then some of them follow on each other. So while I was researching Conquistador, I came across the story of Francisco Orellana and the Pizarro brothers. And so whenever I find something intriguing or tantalizing, I like put it in another folder somewhere and go, to get to later. And so when I finished Conquistador, it was a natural follow-up to write about another conquistador, and the Pizarros were really, these were brutal, the brothers of doom. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do another one. And also I really loved the idea of these being the first Europeans to descend the entire length of the Amazon. And selfishly, because I like to go to these places, so I like pick books where I'm going to get to go to somewhere new, and then once I wrote the book, No Barriers, with my friend Erik, and it was an offshoot of about a decade where I was doing journalism and traveling around with this guy you may have heard of named Mark Burnett, who created Survivor, The Apprentice, and of course Donald Trump. But before all that, Mark Burnett had a show called the Eco Challenge, and he created these incredible week-long to 3-week-long multi-sport adventure competitions, which were some of the hardest races in the world. And I got to travel all over following these things and writing about them, and that was how it led me eventually to Erik Weihenmayer, which resulted in a book. So, and then once I got on the Arctic, ice trail, I just was so into it that I'm 3 books in. And so I think part of it is like following hunches. You obviously have to like the subject matter and be really passionate about it to sustain a few-year project. And so that's really, what guides me is it's usually something that I think to myself when I find out about it, I didn't know that. Like, how could I not have known that? And then I start digging. Like take airships. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You all probably did. But at some point, like Walter Wellman was a revelation to me, because the guy, he was just so ahead of his time and such an interesting human.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I need to keep that tip in mind about proposing books about places that you want to go, because
exactly.
I mean, my one that I'm working on is more like your original horse book, where it's just totally all over the place. I'm like, well, there's no reason to go to anywhere for just one of these chapters. So I'll keep that. Keep that in mind. Very fun. So this is a question from our co-host Scott, who just wants to know if you have any thoughts on Richard Byrd's flight to the quote unquote flight to the North Pole, and then his subsequent flights in Antarctica. I definitely have plenty of thoughts, but I would love to hear yours.
Well, so yes, I do. One of the things that's also challenging about writing a book, especially like Realm of Ice and Sky, is that you encounter all of these fascinating figures. Richard Byrd just being one of them, but there's the Australian. What's the Australian guy's name who tries to fly from? Yeah, Wilkins. I mean, so like there's entire books on Wilkins, and you're like, wow, that guy's cool. So when I obviously as an American, I knew a little bit about Byrd, but So I'm in the throes of writing and trying to deliver. The other thing I should say is that I came home from my trip in Svalbard, and in late June, and I had a deadline of December 1st. So I basically didn't leave this desk for 6 months, except to go play pickleball and hunt birds. But so as a long way of saying, when I wrote the chapter in which, Amundsen is up there, he's telling everybody, look, this isn't a race, but the rest, all of the global media is like, this is definitely a race to the North Pole.
Yeah.
And then you realize, okay, Bird, what a fascinating figure. And then I've got to go on and finish the book. And so I also have folders and files on Bird because, he ends up being a really compelling American figure as well. But what I thought interesting was how quickly, and this I didn't dig into that much, but I have books on it, how quickly his claim of making it there was dismissed. At least it seems to have been dismissed relatively quickly by a number of people who just looked at the records and at the speeds and said, I don't think he could have made it there and back that fast. I don't know, but then, what ended up consuming the argument about who made it first to the North Pole, Bird becomes something of a footnote, and then it's all about Cook and Peary, and Amundsen. I claim he made it there first, but I mean, he didn't set foot there. They're like hovering over it. So these are splitting some hairs. But yeah, I want to do more. And same thing with Ellsworth flights in Antarctica. But as I mentioned to Allegra, I'm trying to take a little break. I need to get off the ice for a book or two and return with renewed passion, because it's a lot of describe. It's like 1,000 pages of describing ice that I've done, and it's like I'm running out of words.
Yeah, totally understand. Well, you can always get your enthusiasm renewed at the Shackleton Autumn School.
This is true. This is true.
Yeah, I mean, the Bird thing is, to me, he was one of the most famous people in the country. He was part of a trio, kind of a triumvirate with Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh, but he didn't have like a crazy bad thing happen to him, or really a crazy good thing. I mean, I guess he was first to fly to the South Pole, but you don't really remember that. You remember Amundsen. So he's kind of been forgotten in an interesting way. I think also he was a particularly uninteresting person, especially from a 21st century perspective. That's neither here nor there. Do we have any other questions in the Zoom? You guys could just pop your mics on and ask if you have anything that Buddy hasn't covered.
I just wanted to ask one more question regarding Bird. I know that there were rumors and diary entries from team members whose diaries haven't been published about Bird actually being intoxicated or drunk on both the South polar flights, as well as I'm not sure North Pole or not, but you mentioned your foot.
I just want to say, I don't know if that makes me impressed or mortified. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Well, his co-pilots were doing all the work anyway.
Right.
He wasn't a very good navigator.
Right.
What I had heard. But those are rumors bubbling under the surface, and I'm sure Bird's estate hasn't released anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because they want to have his reputation unsullied if possible. And I know that happened with Peary. So I actually didn't know about that. It's going to be fun to poke around a little bit. But of course, Peary's family kept his diaries under wraps for a very long time as well.
Yeah.
And I think it took this one book by, I think his name is Wally Lamb or something like that. Is that right? I have it back here, but like he went and retraced the route of Peary and then said, and was able to get into the actual log books. And then of course, the New York Times issued a retraction as late as 1988, saying,
Yeah.
"Yeah, he wasn't first. We don't think."
Wally Herbert.
Yeah.
Wally Herbert. Yeah, Wally Lamb's
Yeah.
another guy. Yeah. But what the discussion about birds' potential intoxication really makes me think about there's I used this article that I found in terms of Nobile's crash, and there was a lot of mudslinging and blame going around in this article that I read. It's really well done, and it kind of makes sense now that you think about it. Like attributes some of his poor decision making to incredible sleep deprivation because he'd been up for like 72 consecutive hours or something, and anyone who's ever pulled, an all-nighter, even just to study for a test, knows that one day's rough, 3 days and you're in a blurry delirium,
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's the one thing that stresses me out the most about Lansing's endurance is when he talks about how little sleep they're getting when they're in the open boats.
I know.
Awful.
And that was life or death. And in this case, I mean, you're trying not to, I guess it's life or death too. You're trying not to crash the airship if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Terrifying stuff, but very fun to read and live vicariously through. Yeah, well, if those are all the questions we have, I mean, Buddy, you've just got this book that's put out. Is there a way that people can join your mailing list to hear about whatever new stuff you've got going on? Where can we find you online?
Sure. Yeah, I do have it's Buddy at buddylevy.com, or the website is buddylevy.com, though I'm woefully behind I'm not really great at keeping my social media presence up to snuff. But also I can my stuff is widely available on the interwebs. And I will say that for history buffs that like I didn't mention, I don't think, that for 2 years I was on a History Channel television show called Brad Meltzer's Decoded, which was back in 2010 through 2012. And because of that experience, I have recently been getting calls to be on a couple of other episodes of these other History Channel shows that are kind of fun. One is called The Unexplained with William Shatner, which is, he's really, the guy has unending endurance. He's 93 and he's still hosting a television show on History Channel. And the other one, on July 21st, on Monday, I'm on a show which is called History's Greatest Mysteries, hosted by Lawrence Fishburne. And that one is about Percy Fawcett and the Lost City of Z, and it's a really great story. The book was written by David Grand, but I really like that episode. And they've had me on a couple of other times for shows about, excuse me, the search for El Dorado, because I cover some of that in my book, River of Darkness. So yeah, I still dabble in a little bit in being a talking head on the History Channel. It's good fun.
Very fun. Well, we will look out for you there. Thank you so much again for joining the Polar Book Club. This was fantastic.
Well, I really appreciate you having me. And I want to end with this, because at almost every talk I did during my mini book tour, I kept getting asked this question. And the one I really lucked out, because I did one in my old hometown of Ketchum, Idaho. It was really great. And it turns out that my former high school chemistry teacher was in the audience, and she knew she was going to throw me a loop, and she asked me, or someone asked me, how hydrogen was manufactured. And I kept floundering that answer in my talks, because it's a little complicated. And so I said, well, as it turns out, lucky for you all, my high school history or high school chemistry teacher is right there, Irene Healy. You field this one. And she nailed it, But I wanted to read, I should have just gone to this on page 49 of Realm of Ice and Sky. Manufacturing the hydrogen gas was a complex and time-consuming process that took 6 men working 12-hour shifts 24 hours a day for a week. Every day, wrote Wellman, they have to handle about 10 tons of sulfuric acid, 8 tons of iron shavings and scrap, pump 40 tons of water, besides other chemicals for drying and purifying the gas to produce the 280,000 cubic feet of hydrogen which the America holds. After being produced by the hydrogen apparatus, the gas was washed, which I don't fully understand, with water piped 750 feet from a nearby glacier, then dried by being routed through a coke-filled cylinder, then removed of acid by piping it through a separate cylinder filled with caustic soda, resulting in hydrogen gas that was nearly pure, very cool, dry, and free from acid, and potentially explosive.
Wow. I didn't know that gas could be washed or dried, but now I do. Thank you so
God
much.
knows.
Well, great. Thank you guys so much. And thank you everybody who showed up to listen. And I will see you all in the Polar Book Club. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you.
Appreciate you having me.
Bye-bye.